Hello, my name is Gabe, and welcome to the show. So, Persona 5 R came out, or Persona 5 Royal came out a few months ago, and I got it close to launch. And I figured I'd do my darndest to try and point out all the differences between Persona 5 Royal and the original Persona 5. Before we begin, we have some housekeeping to do, including removing an elephant or two from the room. How did they even get in there? First off, because this video is about comparing both the original Persona 5 to the remake that recently came out, for simplicity's sake and ease of speaking for me and ease of understanding for you, I'll be referring to the original Persona 5 exclusively as OG from here on out, and Persona 5 Royal exclusively as Royal from here on out. So, Persona 5R does make changes to OG's story. That being said, if story was going to sell you on either game, you probably don't want me to spoil it for you here. So, that's as much acknowledgement as I'm really going to give changes to the story. Both versions of Persona 5 include confidants that you spend time with, who are all represented by tarot cards or arcana. I will be referring to them exclusively by the arcana of which they are represented by, so as to avoid spoilers. Let's get the broad strokes out of the way first and talk about the stuff Royal adds. The completely new stuff, that is. Starting with the Showtime attacks, which are that's why I'm getting away as fast as I can. They're flashy attacks which characters in your party will do in combination with each other, with really cool animations. But the problem is, once you've seen these animations once, well, you've seen them a mess of times. And in the end, it really makes no difference if all I'm going to be doing is skipping them. And the animations are way too long to be worth sitting through a million times. There are two new confidants, Faith and Counselor, which I'm not sure those are real arcana, but whatever. And a new playable month with a new playable palace, which is what the game calls its dungeons. Now, note, in order to get the new playable month and palace, you must reach rank 9 with Counselor by a certain date. The game does a pretty good job of telling you when this is, but just to be on the safe side, I'd recommend prioritizing Counselor over any other confidant when possible. You also get a new playable area to walk around in the daily life called Kichijoji. Don't ask, I almost certainly pronounced it wrong. There are a few things you can do in Kichijoji. From playing darts and billiards, only darts is a minigame, billiards is just kind of a stat-raising thing, to selling laundry, and a few other miscellaneous stuff that aren't really worth getting into. The big point is, it is a new area that does add some stuff to do, and a lot of the new stuff, including some of the new confidant events, can be found in this new area. Lastly, but not, certainly least, is the Thieves' Den. The Thieves' Den has its own list of achievements, and it keeps the music, cutscenes, and some of the art from the game, allowing you to pick it up. Now, you can get most of those on the internet anyways. It also has two other features that are a little more interesting. You can place kind of special decorations down that are ripped right from your playthrough of the game, like places you've been, enemies you've encountered, etc., etc., and confidants you've met will talk about these things. Or you can play the card game President, which this game calls Tycoon. I personally have a soft spot for that game, but still, none of it's really worth really touching, in my opinion. Now, on to changes, and by Jove, are there a lot of them. Now, the first one I want to touch on is minor, but in my opinion pretty important. No, in both Royal and OG, you have 2 slots for your day. A morning slot and an afternoon slot. In the morning slot is when you're allowed to go to dungeons like Mementos, which is the game's infinitely sprawling dungeon, or a palace, which is your current story objective usually. In OG, if you visit one of those dungeons, you were locked out of doing anything slots for the afternoon slot, which meant you basically threw your entire day away. In Royal, if you visit a dungeon or palace, you are only confined to Café LeBlanc, which is your home throughout the game. You can do basically anything you're allowed to do in Café LeBlanc, from watching a movie, reading a book, studying, playing video games, etc., etc., etc. Meaning you're not necessarily losing your day if you can fit something else into your schedule. Overall, this is nice, and it means you're wasting less time, which I approve of. Another minor change. They changed the way security levels work. Now, to explain, in both games, if you're seen by a shadow in a palace, shadows are the enemies that traverse the palaces and mementos throughout both games, the security level will rise. And managing to successfully fight them without them having seen you first, like getting first strikes and stuff, through ambushes, allows you to lower the security level. What's different is, well, in OG, your security level always started at 0, and whatever you raised it to, it would stay the next time you visited that palace. In Royal, the security levels start at a specified number. No, like it starts at something decently high, and then there are perks you can get later on that lower it and lower it. And every time you leave and enter the palace, it always resets to that number. Now, I'll be honest, as far as changes go, this one is pointless. It does nothing to actually change the way you approach the gameplay. Nothing really significant changed from this change. I still approached everything the same way I did last time. Stuff up behind enemies, and get the security level to 0. It's also worth mentioning that in OG, if you get the number to 100, you're kicked out. I don't know if this is a change or not, as I've not actually managed to get to 100 in Royal. I have no reason to believe this has changed, but just in case, I'm putting this here in the video. That's not to say there are no changes to how players are going to interact with the security levels. But it's not because of the changes to the security levels. In both games, and basically all Persona games, you collect infused personas in an attempt to complete your Persona Compendium, or at least get yourself the strongest personas you can have. Fair enough, yeah. Well, the hardest parts of these in OG were the treasure demons. To explain, in both games, if you get the security level raised high enough, or the higher you have the security level raised, from 0% to, like, I don't know, 99%, whatever, the more chances they had of popping out of the treasure you collected. And in Royal, on top of that, they've decided to throw the completionists out there a bone, because these treasure demons are now part of the regular enemy pools. Meaning you are practically guaranteed to find them in a regular encounter, and therefore you don't need to purposely increase the security levels at all to find them. Since I'm not a completionist, I can't really talk and like sing this changes virtues or anything, but it's one worth noting, if you are. Well, we're talking about enemies, we may as well talk about how you deal with them. You know, combat. First off, in OG, if an enemy was afflicted with certain status effects, there was one attack that could give you an increased chance of critting them. Normally psychic, but there were other exceptions. In Royal, however, after going through certain processes and getting certain perks, you gain more and more ways to crit enemies with status effects, making collecting the persona that have no weaknesses 1,000,000 times easier. As you kind of just had to hope to get lucky and get a crit in OG. The last change to combat, and one I'm a little mixed about, personally, is the change to Joker's neutral special, the gun. Okay, worth noting that was not a reference to anything in the game. That was just a Smash Bros. Joke. There's no neutral special mechanic in this game. So, in OG, you were given a decently high amount of bullets, and you had them basically, you had to keep them safe and spared throughout the dungeon run. Until you left. Once you left and came back, the bullets would be replenished. In Royal, however, every enemy encounter replenishes your bullets. To balance this out, they gave you less ammo, and also, to balance this out, in OG, basically any enemy with wings was weak to guns. In Royal, very, very few enemies are weak to guns. I'm not a fan of this change, personally. To really speak about it, I feel like it kind of just diminishes a lot of the gun-based stuff in the game. Number one, with enemies weak to guns, once you finally got gun-based attacks, those attacks felt worth it to have, but now they're really not that special, and I don't generally find myself using them very often. And yeah, that's basically it. I'm not really finding a good reason to use the gun, except for as a basic attack when I want to preserve MP. And if I really needed that, I have a basic attack. Next up is something I don't really have a good transition to. Confidants. I mentioned them briefly to talk about the new ones at the start of the video, but there are a few changes made to how they work. Number one, you now have a bigger opportunity to grow closer to them. Or most confidant rank-up events now have kind of a post-event where they'll call you on your phone, and you can get a few more points that way. And number two, and this should go without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyways, most confidants in both versions give you various perks. Usually they make alterations or buffs to certain mechanics. Any mechanic that's been changed by this new version naturally means that any confidant whose perks affected that mechanic were changed to accommodate for whatever those changes are. Last thing before we get into the big one, crafting. In OG you crafted one thing at a time and you were only able to craft about like a few. In Royal you can craft everything in bulk. And if you craft a few extras, you craft a few extras. Nothing too special here. Now, on to the biggest change. Mementos, which is, as previously mentioned, the game's infinite dungeon. It's where you do a lot of side missions and, well, probably the most important grinding spot in the game. The first thing veteran players will notice is a new NPC named Jose. Or Jose. I can't actually remember how it's pronounced. Forgive me. Jose basically works as a vendor as well as a kind of a side quest. He does three things. Number one, if you collect flowers that you find in mementos, which go away when you leave, so you might as well give them to him, he will let you use them to buy certain things. Usually like some pretty good items and stuff. Number two, stamps. He's hidden a whole mess of stamps down in mementos. The more of them you collect, the more changes you can make. Also, though I didn't experience this myself, I've been told that you get them all, you get to fight them in a bonus boss fight. Can't talk about how good that fight is or how hard it is, because again, I ended up not being able to collect them all because I suck. Number three, in palaces, palaces have been slightly altered to account for A, your new grappling hook, which doesn't really change much, but B, to hide the game's new collectibles in. In OG, these collectibles did not exist. In Royal, they do, and they are will seeds. Every palace has 3, and you collect them all and give them to Jose, or Jose, I'm going to call him Jose. Joe. Give them to Joe, and he will give you special accessories that offer you special attacks. Which, honestly, are really good early game, but late game you will have better equivalents to in your party by default if you're playing to completion. So, keep that in mind. Joe will show up on random floors in random spots. They'll be marked on the map when he does show up. If you see him pop up on a floor, which will also, and there will be a little cutscene, so you'll know he's there. If you see him, pop by and buy some stuff and get the perks you can get from him. Also in OG, every Mementos floor was basically the same. And yeah, there was nothing really too special about them. In Royal, however, every once in a while, every few floors will have special attributes on them. These can range from the room being dark, sinkholes that'll take you down a floor, even one of the game's super bosses, the one that roams around Mementos, who I'm going to talk more about in a bit, appearing immediately. Now, I cannot say for certain whether or not I've encountered all these floor variations, as there's a lot of them. So definitely if you're playing Royal, explore these floors and see what pops up. Might see something I didn't. Who knows? Now speaking of that super boss, in OG there was a really easy way to cheese him. There's a mechanic in both games that on certain days, the enemies of Mementos will be inflicted with certain status effects. One of those is during the days in the flu season, some enemies will have basically a flu status effect that will kill them in 3 turns. That super boss was one of those enemies, meaning you could beat him pretty much immediately if you got him while he was affected by that. As you can imagine, even a super boss, when sick, ain't as good as they usually are. In Royal, though, it seems that super boss went and got its flu shot because he's now immune. Don't worry if you plan to fight him on Royal, though. There's still a trick that does work. Specifically due to weird quirks in the way the game handles enemy encounters. In both versions, if this boss ambushes you in Mementos, they will only get 1 attack, whilst normally they get like 3 against you in a row. Let this boss ambush you. So, for the record, still wouldn't recommend fighting this boss until the end game, and also, just so you know how to encounter them, they show up if you stay on one floor of Mementos for too long. And the reason you might want to fight this boss in the first place is because there is a trophy attached to it. Speaking of trophies, Royal is a million times easier to platinum than OG. Whilst the Thieves' Den does have its own achievement system, none of it is attached to the trophies of the game, and in fact, there are way less trophies to actually get than in OG. In OG, you basically had to do everything somehow, which is very difficult. In Royal, you really only have to do a few things. And the hardest of those probably being fighting the aforementioned super boss. Another small thing that isn't really worth mentioning, but I should get out of the way so no one makes a big deal about it. There's a mechanic you get later on in both games in which you can basically put Persona in timeout for a few in-game days so they can get stronger. In OG, that's all there was to it, and in Royal, they've added the ability for you to basically give these Persona items to boost certain stats. That's all there is to it. And that's everything that's changed. Everything that's new, and that's the comparison. If you like this format, I'd love to know. If you have any other ideas of games that would work in it, please let me know. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you want to see more like it, do subscribe. And, more importantly than anything else, seriously, anything else, have a good night.